I apologise in advance for a couple of things. One is the days of mobile phones did not exist in the 1980s, and so Facebook and all that sort of thing, so we were too busy doing an honest day's work than to photograph everything that was around. So I've had to screen scrape some of these photographs off the internet, so apologies there. Another thing I apologise for is because these events are 25 to 30 years old, and so time passes. So there are two reasons why I'll be a little bit vague tonight. One is the thing about time, and the other is, well, because it comes naturally. So let's go. All right. So I did Masters in Auckland, Master Mariners in Auckland, and always had a hankering to do a CPL. Had booked up at Ardmore quite some time ahead. Did a New Zealand CPL and IR at Ardmore. So a little bit of a caveat side of things, no GPS was available, so it was the raw navigation, WizWheel for planning, all those sort of things. So it was quite a challenge, particularly when you're under time pressure. You're on a call out and you've got a plan and that sort of thing, but that was the job. Never had access to GPS on the aircraft that I flew, which I actually provided myself for the last 2 years. Therefore, there were no glass cockpits. And of course, flying to the continent was that until 1999, every country had its own currency. And it was no trouble to be in 3 different countries on one day. So of course, you've got to carry, when the credit rating of the charter company, which was usually pretty poor, you had to carry enough for fuel, for contingencies, maintenance, all the rest of it, landing fees, and the what-ifs and that sort of thing. So it wasn't just carrying the 3 different currencies and getting pretty versed about the exchange rate. It was the accounting of all this when you got back. So you've had an 11-hour day and you've blown your head and terrible weather and all the rest of it. And she in the office says, well, you're £2 out there. Yes, thank you. Pre-Eurotunnel days as well, which didn't open until 1994. So Eurostar trains, which are brilliant if you've ever done them. You know, London to Paris, 2 hours 10. I've done London to Brussels. 2 hours, something like that. It wasn't there. So this was the opportunity for us to do charters across the English Channel for businessmen. Go over in the morning when they finish the meeting, 2 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Flying back. So that was quite useful, and there were no mobile phones in the early 80s, you will remember, and no internet, so a lot of it had a sense of adventure and challenge because you didn't have those resources available. So this presentation really kicked off simply because I never thought too hard about what I'd done in my hobby until at an event a little time ago, amongst a group of people, we were talking about various jobs we'd done in our life, careers and things like that. And I just casually mentioned that I'd done some charter work around Europe for quite a few years, air charter work. And a lady looked stunned and she said, well, what would a typical day be for an air charter pilot? And being a bit flippant, I said, well, I just might go to Paris for lunch. And she was stunned. You go to Paris for lunch? I've been saving for 3 years to go to France. I want to touch the Eiffel Tower, and if I die, I'll be happy. And it made me realise a lot of people don't have a wider view through travel, particularly younger people today, and putting aside the COVID-19 side of things, there's still a lot of people who think that the world ends at Cape Reinema. Anyway, let's go. After CPL, I was fortunate out of our whole class, probably about 18 guys, I guess, to get a job with the New Zealand Air Charter at Ardmore. And by the way, for the avoidance of doubt, I'm the person on the right. Camera. What had happened is that Great Barrier Island had a resident population of about 500, which would swell then to about 5,000 in the summer, and just work the numbers. There's going to be an accident, isn't there? So, and there was only one resident nurse. And so a deal was done somehow that New Zealand Air Charter would put a pilot in a Cessna 172 over on the island for 3 or 4 weeks at peak period and act as an air ambulance pilot. And of course, the 172, you can just pull the pins, drop the right-hand door off, slip the right-hand seat out, put a stretcher in, the nurse can sit behind you, door back on, and might take 10 minutes. but you could be airborne if required. And there were a couple of times where I had to help in that context. The interesting thing is that, of course, amongst the permanent residents and even the visitors, you know, you've got instantly thousands of friends, haven't you? Because you are their lifeline in case it goes wrong. Being a bit facetious, but anyway, that's the police, the one and only Islands Policeman's Caravan here. So it was pretty primitive existence in the hot summer. Some might say you paid to do it, but it was not part of a get-rich-quick scheme, I can tell you that. But the people themselves were great. You know, you wake up in the morning and there'd be a fresh fish wrapped up in newspaper on your doorstep. That's the upside, happened quite often. The downside was, of course, over that period, you'd get invited to a couple of occasionally to events and all the rest of it, and everyone's doing the knees up and having a darn good time, and you can make a little glass of beer last all night, just in case. Anyway, it was fun. But there we go. And in between the summers, doing two-bit chart work. It was all ad hoc, so you only paid for what you did, which we were struggling with the rent on the flat that we had. One of the regular runs, just leading to the point that I want to make, was down to the Tahara Iron Sands. You can see to the southwest of Hamilton there, Kawhia Harbour way, south of Raglan there. And that was interesting because the whole Iron Sands project was getting going. So I did quite a few of those runs out of Ardmore, taking people down Cessna 172 or a Cherokee 6. It's about a 1 hour flight down there, landing on an airstrip carved into the sand dunes, and wait all day. And then fly them back in the afternoon. So a typical pilot's day could be out at Ardmore at 7 o'clock. Your day starts at 7. You're back at 5 o'clock at night. Hang on a minute, 10 hours. You're paid $3 per flying hour, $6 for 10 hours work. But it's hours in the logbook that really, really count. You know, and I was fortunate over the other guys. I was getting some hours, but it's not a part of a get-rich-quick scheme. So at about that time, the Cross-Channel Hovercraft Company, who I'd worked for 2 seasons prior to that, wrote to me and said, look, we're going for a fleet expansion thing, and you're a known person. If you want to come back, we'll make you permanent first officer and early command training. And well, it's too hard to resist. So we decided to pull the curtain down on the blind down on New Zealand hopes, see if we could regurgitate things in the UK, but we just needed money to live, you know, and open the blinds on opportunities over there. So that's the Cross-Channel Hovercraft there, of which I was permanent first officer, seasonal captain after 1 season, leaving Dover, heading over towards France. The 2 hovercraft companies then, they require the marine qualification, not CPL or anything like that. One of them, Hover Lloyd, was based where Manston Airport in the top right-hand corner there in the eastmost part of Kent itself. We're based in Pegwell Bay, just, we'll see that in a minute, just below the airfield. They're running across to Calais as well. And I live nearby, so it's inevitable, of course, that, you know, I went and joined the local flying club, which was really just getting started. You know, a rotting old porter cabin stuck away in a manky corner of the airfield. It was a military airfield, but we were stuck, and membership, and 2 part-time instructors who were only covering on a rotating scheme. You know, 2 days here and 2 days there, that sort of thing. And when I joined, you know, there was a couple of weekends in the summer where there was no flying instructor available. I mean, it's criminal at a flying club. They had 1 Cessna 150 in those days. So I was there probably 3 days a week and able to possibly influence things a little bit more. So I had to devise a way to try and get that membership base up. Otherwise, the club was going to the dogs after a while. I'll come back to it in a minute. This is Manston, blown up on the history of it, goes back to 1916, World War I days. Really simply because it's on the easternmost part of Kent. It's the closest point to the continent, so that damaged fighter or bomber aircraft coming back from Europe, you know, with major mechanical problems, just looking for a field to put down. So Manston was there. Later, the 9,000-foot main runway was put in there, and the original runway was this grass cross runway. You can see about halfway up the photograph there, and that's Peggle Bay at the top right-hand side of the runway there, with the towns of Ramsgate ahead and Margate away to the left. So that's location. It was owned by the military. It was run as a MEDA, Military Emergency Diversion Airfield, so it was 24/7 manned, ATC. And at night, all the approach lighting, the VASIs, etc., like that, were left on for non-radio equipped or damaged aircraft in distress, that sort of thing. So that was good. Because when I got into the air charter work, and perhaps I shouldn't mention this, coming back to Manston at about 2 or 3 in the morning, controllers are human, and I'd quit Gatwick and they'd say free call Manston. Well, you free call Manston for all you like. There was no reply, so I'd go back to Gatwick and say, listen, can you buzz these guys on the landline? And Gatwick would call back a few minutes later. Remember, you're doing 200 knots, you know, you can cover it in about 16, 17 minutes. You know, sorry, we've tried them on the landline and there's no answer. Still asleep. So, well, it was a predicament. I didn't know what to do first time, so I thought, I'll sod it. You know, the runway lights are on approach, and, well, there we are. So if it's good enough for non-radio equipped aircraft, isn't it good when the controllers are non-radio and I can get in? And then I thought, oh, there's going to be problems, I've got to fly out tomorrow. And then when I asked for a start clearance, they said, you can't start because on our books you haven't even arrived. So anyway, it was, the main runway was foamed if you had a problem, etc. It was equipped with precision approach radar. The military, British military at the time, wouldn't put ILS into the Air Force bases. They had this precision approach radar, which was 2 controllers, one looking after the horizontal vectoring or torquing the aircraft in, and the other with a glide slope to torque you up and down. Sometimes they'd use the same guy. And that was quite useful as a sort of an add-on to our students for wider experience. That's looking from the east across to the west there. It's intriguing, isn't it? You know, in the early days, the military would put a caravan on the end of the runway, 24 hours a day manned. The whole idea was that every aircraft approach, this military rating, had to look out and just check that the landing gear was down. And if the landing gear wasn't down, he had a red pistol which he'd fire as a red warning light. Well, you'd look out the window of a 172 and it looks like the gear's down, but anyway. Also, Manston, just before I move on, is the home of the Spitfire and Hurricane Museum. So, ex-COVID, talked to Melanie over there, who used to do some aviation tours, which included Manston, and talked to her when things get going. So I had to do something about membership. And one of my favourite, PPL, who was doing higher level training, you don't have it in New Zealand, is a thing called an IMC rating. It's sometimes referred to rather awfully as a poor man's instrument rating. It's to give PPLs instrument experience to fly in IMC outside of controlled airspace. So this guy here became a friend after a while. He's actually head of the Kent Police. And so he was a good flyer, and so all I had to do, I phoned up a local Kent newspaper, invited them down for a free flight, and my policeman friend was going to fly one aircraft and I'd fly the other, so they sent a photographer and a young lady journalist down, wrote up a lovely story for the price of a phone call, and 2 hours of your time. We got a wonderful spread in that paper, and the membership went up about a dozen just because of one phone call. So it sort of teaches you to get things going. And the other thing, no one had done it before, is that I developed these what I call Christmas presents with a difference, in other words, gift vouchers. And the club had no money to advertise, so you could give, like you would give people a book voucher, the flying voucher, which call it nominally £100, just easy maths, and all the rest of it. So I took a punt, I put my own money into the advertising campaign. It just went nuts. Within about 2 or 3 days, I was phoning one of our flying club members, asking him to do another print run, or all these things. It just went stupid. And anyway, so we honoured, obviously, the vouchers, but I learnt a lot from that. At the end of 1 year, the vouchers expired after 12 months, because, you know, they do. And there were this is back in 1980, early 80s. There were £3,000, 6,000 New Zealand dollars. So rank that up in today's terms to see how much was unclaimed. It was absolutely crazy, but there we go. This is a snap of the southern England aeronautical chart, and I found after a short time that flying was the easy part to teach. Generally, people were encouraged, and the typical profile would be dad who reached the top of his profession, the kids had fled the nest, the university fees had gone, they paid the mortgage down. Dad had more disposable income, but his inclination to sit down with books and start learning again was not particularly good, and this was a weak point. So I set up night classes through the spring, winter and autumn terms, Tuesday nights every night for 2 hours, and that was oversubscribed. It's what people wanted. They wanted to be able to sit down and in a formal environment and learn. I bought in a lot of equipment. And the other plus, and then later on the IMC training on Thursday nights. I bought in, then another fortunate thing is if you have a look where that purple line is there, that was then what was called the light aircraft corridor, and all light aircraft single engine were required to funnel down from that part of England and fly across where that blue purple line is, rather, because it's sort of the narrowest point, and it meant that if an aircraft went down, search and rescue could focus on a particular area. So we were pretty close to Calais there. You can see it marked down in the corner there. It's shown with an ILS and an NDB. It's more up-to-date photograph there. It had ILS at the time. But what it meant was that it was a short flight. It's only a 30-minute flight in a single to get over to Calais to do ILS training, for example. And the French just made you pay for your first landing, and you could fly all day for free. And it was great. But you go up to Stansted, they don't want you. And you'll pay for every approach, so it was cost effective. But of course, in those days, you had to, in triplicate, export the aircraft. You had to sign an agreement that the penalties if you didn't re-import that aircraft. That was crazy. And it went on passports. Of course, the upside, I guess, was the duty-free side of things. And the secret is, we found by accident, but we did after that, the secret is to arrive in Calais at lunchtime, because the French love their lunch hours. That's a load of horse. 2 hours for lunch. So no one wanted to know about landing fees. It's someone else's problem, and didn't want to see your passport. So lunchtime's a good time. I tried to encourage I found that many of our private pilots were just sort of going around Kent, just not really doing a lot. And I sort of try to encourage people to get out and get wide. And one student pilot wanted to go up to Doncaster. So I thought, well, it's a good opportunity for visual navigation, so he planned it, and we flew up to Doncaster. And surprise, surprise, it just happened to be on racing day. Doncaster's famous for its horse racing. And you get a slot time to arrive, which, come on, is between races, because horses just get freaked by aeroplanes. So you get a slot time to arrive, and you land on the field in the middle of the track there. We watch one or two races, but I found out later the genuine reason why this guy wanted to also be there was he said, we're going for lunch, follow me. And there was about a 15-minute walk, and there was down the bottom right-hand corner, there's a photograph, not of the actual person concerned, but it's a gypsy caravan, and there were a whole park of gypsy caravans, and they are a closed society. You will never ever get into a gypsy caravan. You have to be invited. I was invited for lunch. What a fantastic experience to talk to his parents and just be in that sort of environment. So these are on the upside of just instructing and flying. There was a time when I was doing circuits with a student, a mature guy, good flyer, and doing forced landing after takeoff, EFATO for short, and we used a code word to air traffic that the student supposedly did not know, and basically it was a code word to say, listen, this is a simulator when we pulled the power after takeoff. And so that went a couple of circuits, but then a Royal Air Force Bulldog pup joined, doing training in the circuit. Circuit height's 800 feet at the military base. And we probably were doing about 85, 90 knots. He was doing probably about 110, 120. Inevitable that he would catch up. And of course, one of the basic rules of aviation is that the overtaking aircraft stays clear. So I pulled the power on my student to continue the engine EFATO business, and suddenly the Bulldog, who I knew was fairly clear, cut right across the face, and I mean stupidly, seriously, right across the face, and with the pilot, lieutenant, going like this, like that, and that bugged me because it freaked my student. And I didn't know what to do, never trained for this in an instructor's course. I cleared the area and we went south for 20 minutes while he got things back together. But I filed EMS. And I was dead scared about a diplomatic ref because we're a civilian flying club on a military base. I don't know what the lease agreements were or anything like that. So I didn't want to rock that boat. But on the other hand, you've got a moral duty to stand by an EMS. Otherwise, you're going to do it again. I went up the tower to write a written report and was confronted by the lieutenant concerned, who pleaded with me not to file formally because it would affect his career if I did so. Well, we had a discussion, and tough mate, I'm filing. So, you know, just don't do it again. Went on to then do my UK commercial licence. Remember, I got a New Zealand one. And so they will give you a private licence based on that. So instructed, as you could in those days, on my private pilot's licence, but wanted to regain after 7 years to start commercial flying. The Beech 65, now this is Queen Air. It's like a dog with wings, I can tell you. The company, Kent Executive Aviation, the word executive should be banned. These aircraft were the last 3 on the UK register. They'd rotted in a field way over in Wales. One was used for scrap parts, and to be frank, you needed 2 to ever keep one flying at the time. But again, it's logbook, it's experience, it's flying to the continent, trying to balance these sort of things. So there we go. Certainly a good aircraft in crosswind. It could take anything and a bit more, but totally unreliable to the point that within a few days of us acquiring these aircraft, I went into Brussels, thick fog blanketing the whole northwest part of Europe, and right down on the Minimans, instructed to fly the ILS, and the localizer worked well, that was fine, but the glide slope didn't, so it was a go-round job. Thought it was finger trouble, vectored around again, second time the glide slope didn't work. And, you know, I'm low on CPL hours, you know, in Belgian airspace, and sort of, you got to think about your confidence. But, you know, we kept it together. ATC were very, very good. They vectored me around for a stepped approach and everything was fine. But that was the sort of thing that was sort of happening on a daily basis. So your confidence gets pushed. And the reason why I put a hangman's noose in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide there is because in all my time over there, I probably came close to hanging myself twice. And I'm not the first. if it's any consolation, that just in time is the whole thing about a lot of manufacturing, as you know. And up in Liverpool, near the airfield actually, is the Ford Motor Company's Halewood plant. And they use just in time to bring all components together to keep production lines going, stock holdings virtually nothing. On a particular day in question that I got called in to do a charter flight under duress, or in a hurry, what had happened is that bad weather in the English Channel, a lorry carrying wheel bearings across from Germany had been severely delayed. There's no way that lorry could get up to Liverpool in time without the production line stopped. Hundreds, if not thousands of people on that line. And so they diverted to Manston to load a parked cargo into an aircraft to fly up to at least get the production line continuously. So it was a hot summer's afternoon. These were the silent eras started. Hot afternoon, it was hurry up quick, you know. I arrived at the airfield. Remember, I've got a flight plan. ATC want an hour's notice, although you could generally bend that rule, but an hour's notice. I have to check the weather, everything else like that. And the aircraft was already being preloaded, but not till final weight. The loading person came into the office, and I remember the conversation and said, "How much can we take, Linton?" And on the back, sort of a fat packet, I did a quick calculation, disposable load, and I gave him a figure, and he went out the door. That's fine. Okay, and then I went out. They still had a short time to finish the loading. They had to decant these wheel bearings out of big packing cases into the aircraft because of the width of the door, but that's fine. They would get up to Liverpool. And I made another mistake. I got involved with the loading. Taught me that. You're covered in sweat, you're covered in grease from these wheel bearings and everything else like that. But you need to be composed when you fly. So I learnt that. Never get involved with the loading unless they're pretty doddy birds. And you think I'm joking. Watch the space. Right, and of course as I taxied, the funny feeling, in fact I remember thinking, why don't we do type rating training with the aircraft at maximum all-up weight? Because this thing is a dog. And that should have arrayed warning lights anyway. Longer runway length for takeoff, climbed 100 or 200 feet a minute. The Detling VOR is 45 miles, about 70-something kilometres away. Join Airways Detling, 8,000 feet. There's no way I could make Detling at 8,000 feet, 45 miles away. We were climbing at 200 feet a minute, you know. I could make 4,000, but not 8,000. I knew I was overweight, and there'd been a misunderstanding about the weight. This is an American-built aircraft. I think can talk pounds weight at Wajupa, imperial, and of course the engineer was talking kilos, wasn't he? So what's all behind me is 2.2 times greater than I should have had. There's no way you can turn. You'd stall the turn. You go straight down. Lose an engine, you're going straight down. So it was a bit frightening for a while, but you've got to live with it and see it out of it. So of course I just joined the queue of people and events that have happened. Of course, probably one of the famous or infamous events was in 1983. Watch it on YouTube. Is the Air Canada 767 that was flying over Manitoba, and it flamed out with no fuel because there'd been misunderstanding about fuel loading and definition, and landed at the Gimli. That was called the Gimli glider, wasn't it? Disused Air Force Base. They were doing drag racing on that day. All the passengers walked away, and they actually rebuilt the aircraft, and it flew. So, and Des mentioning the RAES new website. I scripted this a couple of months ago, and after our last meeting, I just next day had a look at the RAES website, just out of interest to see the structure, and Captain Bob Pearson, who was the captain, was the guest speaker at the Auckland RAES back in March. So these are some coincidences. But anyway, there we go. Of course, no prizes for guessing in the UK, and this is pre-climate change awareness, and that the weather was atrocious. So You had to learn to live with that where you could. And the bottom right-hand corner, the big blue one, but have a look at the red in the corner there. That's actually freezing fog covering most of the southeast of England. And that's a screenshot that I found, an actual time thing. So you're living with this all the time. This, if you've been to England and lived there, and you'll know what I mean. It's like this from about November through to March. And for my students, they said, how would you describe it? And I don't know, I think I invented this expression. I said I call it the eighths rule to describe English weather. And that's 8/8 stratus at 800 feet for 8 months of a year. But yeah, now 1988, the sun rose. And the pilot market exploded. You've got no idea. I used to get Flight Magazine once a week. Like every pilot, you read from the back 3 pages, don't you? Never mind what's happening in the news, because that's where the jobs are, at the back. And it was just stupid. A company in Southend, not so far away, British Air Ferries were advertising for first officers on their Viscounts. They'd inherited or bought about 18 of these Viscounts from British Airways, and invited me for an interview. And you know, you learn about interview processes by interviewing the interviewer silently, because when you have a feeling that you've got the job before the game has started, it's also got to say, well, hang on a minute, what's going on here? I just better be a bit, this is too easy, the old free lunch business. And, but of course the thought of 4-engine turboprop time on my logbook was a good idea. But also they did an awful lot of night freight. And the thought of coming back into Southend at 6 o'clock in the morning at the end of a whole night shift, and then driving the 2.5 hours home, didn't bug me. Do I uproot my family, secured kids at school, you name it, and move up to Southend, or do I accept the commute? So there was a bit of dithering there. But whether you like it or not, family do come into it. And I think Tracy Cousins last month hinted on this. Some of her decisions had a touch of family considerations, as they have to. I'm glad I didn't, because the interview was about August of 1988, and they went down the tubes at the end of that year, which wouldn't have been a lot of fun. They remorphed themselves as British World Airways, but they slowly died. Hello. One afternoon, I'm at home. Phone goes. Hi, my name's Fred. And I'm calling from the British Aerospace Flying College in Prestwick. Now, this is going to be a pretty short conversation, Linton. We know all about you. It's a bit daunting, isn't it? KGB, who's been looking under my bed? We know all about you. I found out later on how it happened. And listen, we want you to come up to Prestwick, because we'd like you to join us, you know. So I went up, it's 3 days, you know, you've got to go up one day, stay the night, day full of interviews, the next day too late, stay the night and then get back. So it's a bit of a commitment, but anyway, and I'll tell you what, just went into that place and it blew your mind. British Aerospace, with big bucks in their pockets, set up the most beautiful flying school I've ever seen. It was truly, everything was new, truly professional. I sat through a lecture with a group of Cathay Pacific students who were being trained there at the time, and the way that presentation was, the function, everything, it was truly professional. I was taken out, it's called bribery, to the hangar, and there in the hangar, because only just starting, there were about 4 twins, brand new twins, like a brand new car, isn't it? There's something smell. And there were more than 10 Piper singles with only the North Atlantic ferry hours on them, and that was it. So I was sort of tempted, and they offered me a job. And good employment conditions, almost too good, because they only flew Monday to Friday. Why not? Good for family. And if you were doing night flying, which you wouldn't do every week, but it would be occasionally if you were required to do night flying, there'd be no night flying after midnight, Now that's a good idea. And also you had the day off before the night flying, and you had the day off the next day. So what I'm saying is the terms and conditions were very, very good. But, you know, Prestwick is a lot south of Glasgow there. Good history to it, but it's a long way from nowhere. In the UK, I went up to Stansted and did a day's interview up there for first officers. I was one of about 10 pulled in common interviews and things like that. And it was out of the blue the first time that I'd come across psychometric testing. Remember, there was no internet in those days. I didn't know anything about it. Suddenly 10 of us are sitting down and there's 120 questions, multi-choice, and you've got 1 hour. The clock's there. You've got 30 seconds to answer. Well, you know, 30 seconds a question. And it just blows your mind. Some of them are outright stupid. And you're under pressure the whole time. And then I woke up that the last 20 questions were exactly the same as the first 20 questions. And they just want to see if you're consistent or not. But psychometric testing could really just blow your mind. They offered me a F-27 co-pilot's job based up in Norwich, which I was not warm on. I knew a few people, pilots, who were in that airline, and they didn't speak well of it. Now, one of them that I loved, FR Aviation. FR Aviation used to be flight refuelling, but it's called FR Aviation, based in Bournemouth Airport, down there as marked. And I went down there, fascinating day. I was quite intrigued by it. FR Aviation are part of the Cobbing Group, so do your homework, Google, find out about the defence commitments that Cobham have, and it's just incredible. So FR Aviation had, I think, about 5 Falcon 20s, and they did defence-related work. None of this cargo stuff at night, none of this passenger business, you know, it's defence related. It was quite good. And I put the 2 spying eyes on the top right-hand corner because a part of what they did was sort of related to that. But most notably, have a look at the Falcon 20 and what's under the wings there.
What,
so, no. I don't think so, but I just scraped their photograph. But they were equipped anyway. And after a series of interviews, I was invited to go on a sortie with one of them. What I should have mentioned is that, on the last slide, is that down off Portsmouth is the UK's largest naval base, and there are vast sea areas away to the south that are closed off for naval training, live firing and things like that. So the airspace is closed by NOTAM and the marine equivalent, and it's sort of get out of the way like that. And this particular day, there were warfare exercises going down there off Portsmouth. And of course, this was an era of Reds under the beds, wasn't it? Mikhail Gorbachev and things like that. So from the left-hand side, there's 2 pilots up at the front, but the guy who was basically running the show was the electronics warfare officer who sat back behind you with all the gear, and you basically did what he asked. And so what would happen, we took off and disappeared way across to the west. Remember the danger areas over there. Climbed up very high, maybe 20,000 feet or more, I can't remember, but very high. And we turned towards the naval base, and suddenly, out of the blue, I looked around to the right, and there is a Hawker Hunter jet as our wingtip man, like seriously close. He's our wingman. And so we went back under the warfare officer's guidance, and to a point that if we were Russian bombers or strike aircraft, we would have launched a missile. Suddenly there was a code, and the Hunter throttle fully forward, down it went to fly the profile of a missile attack. So these people were going out to the Mediterranean, FR Aviation, up to Scotland occasionally. In the Mediterranean, they'd be working with NATO ships as part of Defence Alliance. And the more I thought about it, well, you just want to be a bit careful, because sometimes they did target towing. And my logic's not very good. But I figure that the Americans are a part of NATO, And hang on a minute, if you target towing, you wouldn't want an American warship down there, would you? And particularly if it was the USS Vincennes, if you remember events of the Iranian Gulf, shooting down a civilian airliner. So anyway, it was a good company and I was very interested, but anyway. Now that dirty word, I'm sorry to ruin it to death, but you know, it's dirty. It's called money. At the end of the day, the whole thing is aspiration of flying and all the adventure and stuff like that, but it's still money. I don't know what happens in New Zealand pre-COVID, but over there, most, but not all, and that's a key, prospective employers, if they offered you employment, the purple is a 3-year sided triangle. They would take out a range for a bank loan to be taken out at the top of the triangle, and you would repay the legal liability for that loan was between you as the pilot and the bank. However, the horizontal purple line, 3 years long, as long as you stayed in employment with the employer for 3 years, the left-hand side was that the employer would pay off the loan on a monthly basis, so clear of 3 years type rating costs. And of course for the jet, the Falcon 20, can you go to flight safety like next week? We've got a course, ground course going there and flying training the week after and all that sort of thing. The costs were quite high. It all comes into it. You've got to be a bit money savvy. And I saw someone smile back there because they probably realised that when I put this together, the pilot's there with money and he's in the red. Anyway, you think I'm going crackers, don't you, when I've got the Royal Mail sign up there? Well, no, there's logic. So what happens, you may be aware, the British Postal Service are very, very good. So New Zealand Post, eat your heart out. The Brits then said, if you posted a letter by 5 o'clock at night in those famous red post boxes, it'll be delivered anywhere in the UK except north of Scotland by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Super, brilliant, seriously good. So Birmingham Executive Aviation advertised for pilots, and I met all the criteria except the minimum requirement was 50 hours twin time. I only had 22 hours, and that's for my twin type rating, twin instrument rating. I only had 22 hours. But I wrote a tongue-in-cheek letter, and I just said, oh, by the way, I note this, and I've only got 22 hours, but, you know, if circumstances change, this can be a ring. Posted it. 9 o'clock the next morning, the phone goes. Hello, it's Birmingham Executive Aviation. We've just got your letter here. We'd like you to come for an interview at 2 o'clock. Pardon me. I've got to do a quick calculation. Can I get from home to Birmingham 2 o'clock? Probably not. I said I can make 3, but I can't make 2 o'clock, madam, the HR department. Oh, yes, you can. You live we've done our homework. You live 3.2 miles from the Margate railway station. There's a train leaves there at 9:52. It gets into London, Victoria at a certain time. You will take a tube across to whatever the mainline station is. You will get into Birmingham New Street Station at 13:41 hours. Our driver will meet you up. You can make 2 o'clock. Fine. And that was good. For the interview for the Jetstream 31, but yes, again, you know. Now, the best thing ever, when you arrive, and I was there on time, is to be informed that the interview process is running late. In fact, I think they said about 20 minutes late. Well, it's fine. Just get your head together and that's fine. The best 20 minutes I've ever have. And I'll tell you why. I sat in the reception area just waiting, and I watched the staff, the management staff. I watched the staff generally around, and then an incoming crew. They'd just flown in from Milan. 2 pilots and 1 stewardess came in, and the outgoing crew, they met virtually in front of me and did the handover about route weather and technical. The whole brief was done right next to me. What I really, really liked, the conviviality amongst the crews and the laughter and joviality, and this was happening with the management, and there was no tenseness about the whole thing, and I think that's worth something. I was offered a job, but she Did not want to live in Birmingham. Now, you're not going cross-eyed, and you're not, on these logos, you're not seeing double. You're not even seeing double. You're seeing double plus one. There are 5 logos there simply because, that's the way I thought I could explain the number of days I did in interviews with British Airways. Mind-blowing. The advertisement in Flight International said, we are recruiting and we're looking for pilots up to age 49, please apply, etc. like that. I was 40 at the time and I thought, well, this could be an opportunity. So off a letter and get involved. I'll tell you what, there was one day doing simulator training, testing. There was one day doing a flying test up at Oxford. There were 2 days of interviews, one-on-one group interviews. And those psychometric tests, that would unstick you. I mean, some of them are just stupid. They really are, but I won't get into that. And the third one, the last one, by the way, the 5th one, would you believe, was a British Airways doctor to do a medical. I just renewed my CAA medical weeks before. No, we're British Airways. And I failed the medical because I needed a filling done up here somewhere. I knew, and I was going to get round to that when I'd done all this interview business, but I failed because I had that. And they said, well, of course, if you're a pilot, you're down South Africa, and then it starts causing problems, headaches, and whatever toothache does. Well, we can't have that and all the rest of it. So I had to go to my dentist, get this done straight away, get a letter from him, and I passed my British Airways medical. Fascinating. So let me go back to British Airways. I was a little bit narked. So it actually turned out for the better. This is how white night moves start. I didn't know at the time. So I'd signed somewhere along the line authorisation for British Airways to approach my present employer, the hovercraft company, for employer references, because you weren't going anywhere without those anyway, so somewhere I must have signed it, I'm sure. And remember, I was a permanent first officer, which is seasonal captain, and at this time I was on about a 3-month seasonal captain job. And about 2 weeks after the last interview, I got a letter from British Airways saying, sorry, you haven't got the job, but they didn't give a reason. And that narked me a bit. You know, if I've got a problem, I'd like to know so I can try and improve myself and things like that. So I phoned up their HR department up in London, and they said, no, we don't tell people. It just starts arguments and all the rest of it. But I managed to persuade the lady who sort of said, don't tell anyone I told you. She went away, got my file, and she came back. Well, she said the real reason is because what we did is we've got this massive fleet explosion going on, but we don't know what the temperature of the pilot market is, or the volume, or we don't know anything. The only way we could advertise was to do this experiment. I thought, I'm not an animal. You've just experimented on me for 5 days. But that was their way of doing it. And she said the real reason is because the ratio of your hours to your age fell below the cut-off line, so tough. Well, at least I knew. And went into work, the day job, hovercraft the next day. Remember, I got this letter saying I wasn't successful. But the hovercraft operations manager came up to me and he said, look, he said, I'll just get straight to the point. We know that you've been applying to various airlines, in fact, very recently to British Airways for employer references. We know you're looking elsewhere for a job. And I've talked to the MD and considered it, but we want to make you an offer. And that is you stop looking for flying jobs. We want to retain you. And we will make you permanent captain now if you stop looking for more jobs, but like a night move, and all the rest of it. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, this could be a good idea because you've got status and also captain's salary is like the difference between first and second officer is sort of almost nothing. But between first officer and captain is quite significant. The company ran a final salary pension scheme. So hello, number of years times the final salary. I'm enjoying that now. That sort of thing. So, you know, that comes into it. So I thought about it for a minute and the operations manager didn't know I got this letter yesterday. So I said, well, thank you very much, David. Can I let you know in the next few days? And we'll keep him on tenterhooks, you see. It's plagued with fire, because the next day you could have said get lost. But anyway. So I agreed not to look further for the moment, and was made permanent captain on the spot. Anyway, at a time that what happened is that, as Des indicated to you, the Cessna company licensed, I think it was the Rams Aviation in France, to build these Cessna F406s. So it was a bit of a bastardisation of the 404 Titan and the 411, wasn't it? 441 Conquest and that. And in order to get the breed going in the UK for the first sort of 3 operators, they offered the aircraft free for a year, no lease charges. It was just simply power by the hour. What do you want? So Air Thanet, have a look at the registration, GTHAN, was set up, and I was their one and only pilot, so chief pilot as well. And it was a good aircraft in many ways. PT6 1112As, 500 horses each side, 375 something kilowatts, 230 knot cruise, good climb, a good aircraft in many, many ways. And the undercarriage was brilliant for any rough field landings with a trailing link arrangement there. And so generally, payload of about 2.2 tonnes, metric tonnes. So it was quite good. And so this is the Cessna 406 opened up. Not ours. We didn't have the cargo pod down underneath, but a lot of openings for loading, baggage and things like that. The point I'd like to make is that the pilot access, when the back was full of luggage, for example, baggage rather, the pilot had to enter and exit via a clip-on ladder through this the gull wing access. Remember, like the DeLorean sports cars of years ago, the gull wing went up, and you had to climb like a monkey up this ladder and climb in. Difficult if there's 2 pilots, you know, that sort of thing, and pull the hatch down. So I just point that out because you wouldn't want that to come off in flight, would you? At the back, the passenger steps folded down, the passenger door folded down, as many do, steps up, and the top part, the window part, went up for a bit of rain protection. The left-hand cargo door opened, and when you were in freight mode, you could change out in about 35, maybe 40 minutes, or the engineer would, and the cargo net was there. So we I ended up doing about 60 mail trips. This is night mail, starts at about 6:30 at night, finishes about 3:30 in the morning, which is not a lot of fun when it's sub-zero and there's 30 knots of wind and all the rest of it, and you're cold and tired. So we would leave Manston down here at the beginning of leg 1, fly down to Lydd, load up with mail, hoof it up to East Midlands. What a sight. There'd be maybe a dozen other similar aircraft coming from all over the UK, like bees, and the mail would be sorted up there. Wait of about maybe 3 hours, down to Gatwick, unload, and then dead leg it back to base in Manston. And I just mentioned the little window in the top right-hand corner. You probably remember the British Midlands accident, brand new 737 in 1989. Misunderstanding it with a crew, it was new on type, everything, those sort of things. So you can't keep an airport closed forever. Yeah, clear the mess and do your bits, but you know. So we were flying in there, well, at night, but the motorway is fully lit, you could still see it, and it's a reminder just how cruel aviation can be. The passenger configuration, well, the seats, one of the common complaints was there were no armrests, and that was probably because of cost, it was because of weight, but above all else, when you had to do a quick change out and then reconfigure after cargo back to passengers, you didn't need to start working out whether it was a left-hand seat or a right-hand seat or anything else like that. This was a bit unnerving, and you can overhear comments from passengers about feeling insecure because there's no armrest. In fact, again, your confidence get knocked. When we took this, I did type rating training and exams and things. And the first charter was from Manston across to Twomth, Air Force Base, which is in Holland, near Enschede, and there was a load of passengers there, but one lady decided this no armrest business was too much for her, and thankfully she decided before we took off to opt out. I didn't want that in the air, so there was those sort of things. View to the co-pilots on the right. Obviously the controls were duplicated, but the instrumentation was not. On the right-hand side in our aircraft as well. So typical twin, very good autopilot, I could praise that. Virtually all modes. The one mode that I missed when you're flying single pilot IFR, and that's altitude capture, because if it's an altitude bust is being a bit naughty, isn't it? So it didn't have that. And it was good, and weather radar, of course, as well. So back to the 406, and also just while I think about it, I mentioned the trailing link gear, really good. But leaving East Midlands with a mail one night, the gear failed to retract. You can recycle it, you can do whatever you like. You can have a little prayer, but the gear would not retract. And the circuit breakers are in, so what do? We're up into freezing levels. So airways come down to below the freezing level. And you know, in the type rating, in the type manual, there's no reference to what to do if your gear stays down. And of course the engineers looked at the squat switches and they couldn't find anything. And of course it happened a few weeks later and suddenly, is it me? Don't know how to raise the gear. So it only happened twice, but it was a bugger. Just digressing before I get on to some of the charters, there was a certain thing about the UK CAA written exams, and you've got to get your head around this. They were all multiple choice questions, so maybe 3 or 4 answers, but they had penalty or negative marking. Do you know what I mean? Some do, but some don't. And it's a real bugger. Because what happened is, let's say a question is worth 2 marks. Tick the right box, you get 2 marks. That's great. And but if you tick the wrong box, they don't want you to guess. They want you to ignore it if you don't know the answer. But if you tick the wrong answer, not only did you get the 2 marks that you didn't get the 2 marks that you should have done, but they penalised you for 50% of the value. So effectively, you lost 3 marks. So it became as much exam technique as it did actually knowing the subject, because once you got to 70 and a little bit more and you were confident, you were best just to leave the thing alone. You know, the type rating exams were exactly the same, but there was a CAA. Now remember the CAA, maybe I've got this wrong. I thought the CAA were the regulator, but maybe I got it wrong. I went up to Gatwick to do this 406 type rating exam. And on the right-hand side, if you thought any of the multiple choice answers weren't correct, you could annotate the question and say, I don't think this is right. And I'll tell you what, more, and I mean more than 10% of the questions, or the answers, were not even near correct. It was absolutely crazy. Bear in mind, I've been in Amsterdam for 2 days the week before, so I was pretty fresh on the exam and the technical side of things. And now, and you had to write down what you thought the answer was. Now, you're telling the regulator what they should be doing? Last one on the bottom, weather forecast. It was pretty good to start with, because what would happen is if you saw a charter coming up there, and you could be going anywhere, you know, you would order up a route forecast, and this was a professionally prepared route forecast, really, really good. They were blooming good, those guys. And then suddenly, almost without warning, I think as well, this is cost cutting. And anyway, you guys have done a meteorological theory, meteorological practical. You can do it yourself. So now you're off to Dusseldorf. You've got to work all this weather out and from METARs and synoptic charts and all the rest of it. It was just another burden. So some charters of note. One was that I was to fly from Manston empty in ballast. Wrong one. Yeah, here we go. down to lead in the passenger configuration, fly across to Latuke with passengers that had already pre-arranged. Meanwhile, the MD and the engineer had hired a van, had gone by ferry across to France and were waiting for me down at Latuke. They stripped the seats out because then I had to go down to Barcelona, overnight Barcelona, and take freight back the next day. What peed me a bit was that without warning, suddenly one of the MD's mates is there. He's coming along for the ride. Hang on a minute. Wait is always a consideration. And now I've got to sort of look after this guy, babysit him. I wasn't, anyway, it was fait accompli, so I had to do it. We got into Barcelona late at night and out to the airport first thing in the morning because and I flight planned and calculated. We go from Barcelona up to Southampton, refuel in Southampton, and then it's a 2-hour leg down to Glasgow. Do all that in a pilot's day. Be all right according to the rules. Well, hang on a minute. We went to the airport the next morning and I'm informed that the freight coming to the aircraft would be a bit delayed. So we fueled up to the gunnels with fuel and sat there waiting for the freight. And without warning, out comes a series of baggage trolleys behind a tractor for us with about 3 or 4 times the weight that we had on this load sheet I'd been given by the company. And the agent said, well, you've got it. And I said, no, I've got this weight, I'm fueled up for it, I'm taking off the first 1 or 2 luggage trolleys, and I'm going. Suddenly he didn't speak English, did he? Oh, yes. And he looked up at the control tower, and he looked at me and he said, if you don't take all this freight, you're not going anywhere. Because they're all mates, aren't they? So we had to defuel the aircraft. Now, you try getting fuelers who are happy to fuel your aircraft and take your money, you try and get them to take some of the fuel out and give you some money back, and it is very, very difficult. So I gave that to the MD's pet, who was there, the task of doing that. Now I've got to go and re-flight plan because of all the rules, flight planning rules. I've got to get over the Pyrenees, about 12,000 feet. So we need to go up to 16, about flight level 160. A short hop to Bordeaux, then go up to Jersey, refuelling each time. Therefore, time, minimum half an hour. Into Birmingham, refuel, up to Glasgow, unload the cargo, refuel, and back down to Manston. And I might possibly, just by maybe 1 or 2 minutes, have busted the pilot duty hours with discretion, but that was pushing the whole time. And of course, above 10,000 feet, you've got the oxygen mask on. It's quite an experience, but it's all part of it. Now, one thing we won't get in New Zealand is the next event. Every pilot will tell you that you see a sunrise, you see sunset, you fly over mountainous areas and the beauty that aviation allows you to see, but you won't see this in New Zealand. Out of Airways, Clacton VOR Airways across to Amsterdam Schiphol. Hang on, I can tell you it was April, spring in the Northern Hemisphere. And Dutch ATC, I just love them. They're so good, so helpful. And Amsterdam called me up as I'm approaching the coast, and the conversation said, would you accept a non-standard low-level approach to expedite your arrival Schiphol? Oh, yes, great, let's go. Barrel down to not too high, and what they try to do, they try to help you go in under all the big heavy jets and slot you in rather than just being one in the stack, the pattern. Very, very good. And we're flying east, of course, if you think about the geography, and there's a bit of haze, and normally you'd see the horizon come up there. And I don't know if it was me or psychedelics or something else like that, but I saw red up ahead, and over there was yellow, and there was purple over there. And of course we crossed the coast, and this was a regeneration of what the passengers would have said, the Dutch tulip fields. It's just seriously beautiful. Tulips from Amsterdam. Then the big question about morals or money. Where you're putting morals or money. Oh, where were you on Friday the 22nd of September 1989? Well, I can tell you I was up the ladder. at our home, just getting ready to paint some windows, wooden windows. And my wife comes with a phone in her hand, says, they want you urgent, urgent, urgent at Manston. They'll tell you when you get there, local flight. And, all right, well, it was urgent, that's fine. Means I don't need to paint today. So 2 minutes to get changed, grab my bag, go into the airport, so 25 minutes. And to be told that, of course, what had happened is the IRA had bombed the Royal School of Music, the Royal Marines School of Music in Deal, just to the south of us. And Deal, it's actually warmer, at the bottom of the blue line there. And remember, it took about 25 minutes to get in the airport. And I arrive at the airport, and there is a camera crew and a couple of journos. Where did these people come from? Deep freeze or something? How do you get a camera crew there in that time? God knows. And they wanted to go down. They want to get a scoop, of course, of events. Well, a quick mental calculation says that after takeoff at 200 knots, I can be there in under 5 minutes. So 10 minutes for preparation, taxi, 5 minutes down. I can be there in 15 minutes. So the camera crew on board, everything else like that. And that was the scene later that day of the bombings that killed quite a few bandsmen. And I would not now it's uncontrolled airspace down in Deal, and so once it was a VFR flight, weather was good, so once I taxied, I take off, it's unrestricted, it's uncontrolled airspace, I can do what I want. No one can tell me what I want to do. And hang on a minute, this is going to be a good contract price for doing this scoop and getting it on the media. And air traffic control, as I was about to start, called me and said, there's a no-fly zone has been requested. It's not enforced now. Was I aware from it? Well, I wasn't. And so you've got a moral dilemma of what's to happen. And something made me hesitate because I had been on the flight deck of the Royal Fleet, when I was in the RFA, Royal Fleet Auxiliary, on the deck of the HMS Ark Royal, the aircraft carrier, out in the Far East one night, years before, and I'd watched the bandsmen parade and perform there. It's just seriously good. Professional, everything, and I thought that maybe some of these guys were being minced by the IRA and things like that, and something made me say, well, stuff it, you know, I'm flying, and when the no-fly zone's enacted, I'll obey it, but until now it isn't, I'm going. But something made me stop, and so I hadn't actually started. I walked, we were parked right next to the terminal building. I walked back, and I would prefer to talk to the controller on the phone rather than over the airways where everyone can hear what's happening. And the controller said, well, this is a situation. He said, in that last minute since I spoke to you, emergency services have advised that they've got infrared sensing equipment on the site and also sound sensing equipment as well. You've got a turboprop, you make a lot of noise, and it could interfere with the sound sensing equipment as the emergency services look for trapped men down there. And so now I've got a money or a moral decision, and I decided, no, I'm not flying. I'm not going to do it. I can't do that and be party to it that might interfere with these guys in difficult circumstances. So I go back out to the aircraft and announce my decision to the media. Well, I took both barrels in the chest, and I was everything. You can write the script yourself, but you know what I mean, you know. And just as they were letting go for a second wave on me, the airport duty officer came and said, the no-fly zone's just been enacted now. So a little bittersweet sort of thing there, but they're hard decisions. The thing about centre of gravity, every twin pilot's had this problem. Is that, of course, when you depart, you should leave a load sheet behind, a copy of your load sheet behind, signed. Well, it becomes a bit of a nonsense because I was given a night mail assignment out of Liverpool one night. Usually it's East Midlands, but Liverpool for some reason, I remember. East Midlands were good. The supervisors loading the mail there, you could say, please put all the heavy baggage bags, mail bags, sacks, up to the front, and they were quite obliging. They were quite good. But the thing is that when you end up in Liverpool, you're dealing with Scouse people, and their command of the English language is vast. It's just 2 words. And one of them's not very, very nice. They just anti everything else like that. You don't really have a lot of control. Or you get a piece of paper from the weighbridge that just coincidence happened to equal the amount of disposal, although you said that you could take. Always. Coincidence. And so I taxied the aircraft. I can't say I detected a problem. I can't. We're pretty much chocker and heading down towards Gatwick and that. But there's no doubt in the roll, there's something in you gets a feeling that there's a centre of gravity thing, and particularly on rotation, and climb out was a struggle. So we're going up 8,000 or more feet. You know, you fight that aircraft. All the way up. You can boost the power, you can do what you want, you reduce the power, that sort of thing. But the real problems were top of climb when you're trying to level out. And of course, you know, you would normally put the nose down and just back the power and trim it up and everything's fine. And I struggled for probably 10, 15 minutes, I don't know, I lost sense of time. But I had to fight that thing in level flight. And the Mo Charlie transponder printout must have looked like a porpoise. And I was just balancing power and attitude and everything I could to keep that aircraft in the sky. We were just tail heavy. It could be frightening if you think about it. But by the time you get to Gatwick, you're burnt off fuel and landing's okay. But that's the second time I nearly hung myself. Then what happened is that the Manston was sold to a private organisation, and it now Manston becomes Kent International Airport. And of course international airports got to be cut, don't they, with a ribbon. And so we, Air Thanet, got the job because Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York fame, was going to come and cut the ribbon. Now, the way the royal things worked, certainly in those days, there was a hierarchy. Obviously, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh down there like that. So as long as it goes down some point there, anyone flying there would fly on the royal flight, which I think were BAE 146s in those days. Purple airspace would be declared. Basically, this means get out of the way, the Queen is coming, etc. like that. But because Sarah was flying alone and Andrew wasn't there, she was not permitted to use royal flight, she had to use a civilian contractor. And I'm not the person to ask if you want to know what Andrew was doing that day. So the rules said there had to be an ATPL. Well, I was only CPL at the time, so we had to buy in one of my fellow pilots from our Norwich sister company. We bought him in for the day because he had ATPL. So I flew the leg across to Northolt. Northolt's a military base just on the north side of London. Easy to find because you just come in from the south, right over top of Heathrow. The big boys are coming and going underneath you, and you just go right over the middle, and there's Northolt. And of course, the PV, the personal vetting business, has gone on some days, weeks before, I suppose. And anyway, so 2 of us flew the aircraft up there. We were strip searched on arrival, and at one point, yes, when I was dressed again, I had to go back out to the aircraft. I'd forgotten something, and they had actually taken off a couple of panels of lining to make sure there were no IEDs hidden behind there. You know, this is how thorough they were. Also, the rules were that the aircraft had to be 0 hour on the maintenance certificate. And so we were working on a 50-hour maintenance cycle, with extension, I think, of about 10% or something. But it didn't matter. You could only be 5 hours freshly out of maintenance, and you had to take the plane back and get it zeroed again. Well, of course, it's all built into the contract price, but, you know, you've got to position up to Stansted, you've got to get a taxi back, and you've got to go up 2 days later, that sort of thing. And when I brought the aircraft back the night before to Manston, went into a hangar, there was an armed guard. This is sort of level of protection that went on. Now, I was silly. Because the other pilot was flying, but it was our charter, so I'm sort of the boss, and we'd filed airways. Sarah Ferguson's there, she's got a lady in waiting, or PA, whatever you want to call, and two DP guys, diplomatic protection guys there as well. That's fine. And it was a beautifully calm day. There was not a breath of wind that side of the equator. It was just a perfect day. And being kind-hearted, of course, I cancelled airways, and I would thought we'd treat Sarah to a low-level special VFR that you can do in the UK through control zones in good weather conditions. So right over the middle of London, and I thought that would give her a bird's eye view of London. Well, of course, it would give us a good bird's eye view as well. And I simply forgot the basic rule of physics, and I apologise, Sarah, but, you know, I'm a fool. I acknowledge that. One of the basic rules of physics is hot air rises. And I'll tell you what, that was a rocky trip across London, because a city that's got 6 or 7 million people, plus industry and everything else like that, we're all over the place, weren't we? Hello. Cut the ribbon. We arrived in Manston, and of course the carpet goes down and the razzmatazz is there. The event organiser, of course, wanted the two pilots in the photographs, and the Norfolk pilot was camera shy, and he just like this and wouldn't go into the terminal. I would have liked to go, but of course this is going to be all over the television news that night. It's going to be a big spread in the papers and everything else like that. Sarah, big event. In East Kent. And of course the last thing that I wanted was my day trip employer seeing me saying, well look, you know, on the roster the 2 days are meant to be rest days, but you're flying royalty route. What's going on here? Because I'd forgot to extend the original agreement that simply said I could flying instruct, and I forgot to renew it when I got a commercial licence. So anyway, I could have said it was instruction. Now, let me also give you some advice. If you want to pay off diplomatic protection officers, this is what you do. We arrived in Norfolk, Northolt, I beg your pardon, on time, and the entourage of the 3 or 4 limos are there. There's a lot of people, and it's a big event just for Sarah to come back. She's sitting right behind me, so we're still strapped in. We're just going straight back to Manston. And she leaned between us and said, "Great flight, really enjoyed it, guys. Thank you so much." I didn't even think. And I just said, well, because she'd just done a PPL a few weeks earlier, and it was publicised, you know, that. And I just said to her, how's your own flying going? Are you keeping up? It's important for continuity. She sat down. And for about 5 or 10 minutes, I got her thoughts about flying and aviation. And the loveliest, shouldn't say that thing you can see, is that Sarah's there. The DP guys are behind her, but in my line of sight. And the guy is going like this. At me, and I just waved, and she finished speaking and she went. So that's not what to do. Anyway, on to the charters. And you thought I was joking earlier about beauties. We had a charter to fly Manston to Gatwick, pick up 10 ladies. And about 6 of those were UK fashion journalists, and 4 were about 4 were lady models. Flying them down to the French Air Force base down in called Bricy, down in Orléans, down south of Paris, marked up there at the bottom of the diagram. Christian Dior, the French fashion house, were launching a new perfume the next day. So these people were going down, the lady journalists, to write up stories, etc. like that. So I got them there late one afternoon, kicked my heels around Orléans next day. There's plenty to see and do. And then the next day to fly out. Now, I swear, even all these years later, because I prefer to fly with the right-hand seat, because I didn't have a second pilot, empty, because I can leave all my charts and notes there on easy access instead of the briefcase down below. But it was only coincidence that the most stunning of these models just happened to sit in the right-hand seat. And of course, it's so important to make sure that seat belts are fastened. In fact, you should double check all your passengers behind you. And I thought, well, here we go. you better fly as well. And but this girl couldn't string 2 words together. It was a wasted space, you know. Anyway, leaving one at the afternoon out of Orleans, and French air traffic said about a 45-minute delay. I prefer to keep people out of the aircraft, it's cramped, etc., like that. So I kept them in the terminal for nearly 45 minutes. It's much easier. And I was just talking to the group. And one lady journalist just struck me as the most intelligent woman I've ever known. She was smart. She was brilliant. The questions she asked, you could see why she was a journalist. And I just found that lady attractive in the sense that she was good company. And I invited her to sit in the right-hand seat on the way back. And so we took off and headed back towards Gatwick. And of course, you know, you get quiet periods, particularly over the English Channel. And I just glanced behind me and everyone else is fast asleep. But she's got a headset on and we're talking. She's asking about flying and that. So I just sort of gave her a gentle flying introduction to flying. Just this is what we do, that sort of thing. And she asked the most intelligent questions and really seriously good company. You know, of all the passengers you carry, you don't know their names. You don't. It's a list. You tick them as they get on board, sign the manifest, and that's it. For some reason, I remember this lady's name. Don't ask me, but I think it was that day. 5 months later, I was on holiday in Tenerife, down off in the Canary Islands, just off the West African coast. No English news, nothing else like that. English newspapers too expensive to buy. 2 weeks holiday means just switch off, hot sunshine and beaches and things like that. But I took a walk one morning and walked past a newspaper outlet that was displaying all the different European countries' newspapers. And my eye just caught two of the British newspapers, the Independent and Telegraph, I think, were there, and both had the same sort of story leading. And there was an inset on one of the newspapers to say that a lady fashion journalist from England, they were sending a medevac aircraft out from England to return her for very specialist treatment in the UK. And the more I read down, it was this lady who'd sat in the right-hand seat. And that really sort of gets to you just how fragile things can be. And what pees you off very, very badly, what had happened, it was at the Sheraton, the Cairo Sheraton Hotel. Yeah, Sheraton Hotel. So what they've done to create the Bedouin, you know, the Arab sort of feeling, they've built a tent on the side of the hotel, haven't they? So people can sit outside and sort of, there's a gas barbecue there and they can eat an outside meal inside a tent to get this experience. And then the gas fire explodes, the tent catches fire, the hotel catches fire, and 18, was it, or 16 people died in that, and this girl was badly fried. And you know, in the inquiry later, the hotel management said the hotel complied with Egyptian law at the time that did not require sprinklers. Anyway, that bugged me. So it bugged me for weeks, and so I got a card and I wrote a letter and just said, you might not remember me, but remember we did Channel and all the rest of it. Look, I just wish you good luck. There's nothing I can do but except to wish you good luck. And I didn't know where to post it, so I got a bigger envelope and I just wrote the editor, Harper's and Queen, which was later Harper's Bazaar, magazine, London. God bless the British Post. I just wrote a covering letter to the editor and just said, please forward this. And 6 months later, probably more, I can't remember. In fact, I'd forgotten about it, to be honest. I got this lovely letter back from her and said, thank you very much. Of course I remember. And that it's only now that I can start replying to all the letters, that I'm only well enough. I won't be the same again. I'm going to be in this hospital still for a long time. But one letter can mean a lot. And that touched me. Anyway. And then, God bless the Germans. The Germans, of course, EU was integrating, wasn't it? So under ESA, the European Aviation Safety Agency based in Germany, Germans had a lot to say. So the CAA had their own rules, so we needed to integrate and have common rule structure across, particularly for aircraft like ours. Single pilot IFR was going to go. And this posed some difficulties because it was commercial suicide. You know, we were given a mail contract that it was on, the post office just said, look, you know, this mail contract is yours. You've done well, I've done 60 flights, and you've got it. And we couldn't man it. I interviewed about 10 pilots. None of them wanted the job of working for a fledgling single aircraft operator way out in the east part of Kent when the job market was buoyant. You know, we couldn't. I offered about 3 or 4 jobs, couldn't get them. So this was going to be suicide for us. But we hummed and hard, and the 3 of us as operators, Glasgow and Norwich and ourselves, appealed this to the CAA. And the CAA gave us a 6-month dispensation where we could carry a private pilot in the right-hand seat, which of course would satisfy the German, because we all know if you've got a white shirt on and you've got a stripe on your shoulder, you must be a pilot. And so this dispensation for six months. So I wrote a training course, it wasn't difficult, and CAA said, yeah, that's fine. So now I've got to get, my criteria were private pilots with twin ratings or private pilots with IMC ratings, preferably, but I didn't know whether I could do that or not. Now you can see the scene. I just walk up to the flying club just up the road there, and I put this pilot's wanted sign on there, and I tell you, I didn't make it back to the company's office alive. Oh, like inundated, and then it's not fair, you know, he got the job, I didn't, that sort of thing. Because if you were a private pilot, you could sit in the right-hand seat and you could bomb around Europe or Scandinavia and get £50 a day for it too. And get to, it'd be an adventure, wouldn't it? And a good experience and things like that. So I had to make my mind up. I chose probably about 6 or so people, various reasons. One particular person, and I'll come to him in more detail, was a guy called John Burrett. John Burrett, you'll hear more about in a minute. John Burrett was a QC, Queen's Counsel, based in Canterbury, the city of Canterbury, a stone's throw away from where we were. And, but he was a club member. I chose him because he had a twin-engine aircraft of his own, so he had some twin experience. With being a QC, what's your availability? Well, I can cover weekends and nights and stuff like that. So I actually offered the job to him. Actually, his wife had sort of similar experience, and a few others as well. But I'd made a mistake. The first time I had John Burrett, QC, in the right-hand side seat, I knew within a short time I'd made a mistake. And he argued the toss about every single thing. And you've got to be tolerant. You've got to try and encourage these guys to form the team bond and all the rest of it. But there's a limit to what you can. And a bit of an aggressive character. And anyway, this happened a couple of times. I tried dropping hints to him, sort of saying, good idea, John, but listen, I think we'll do it this way, like as gentle as you can. But one night in East Midlands just was too far. No one in the world has ever spoken to a QC as I did that night, but someone's got to do it. And of course, if he says, well, you can sod off, then the next train was at 5:30 the next morning. This is about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I said, you've got to change your attitude. I looked him in the eye and I said, you've got to change your attitude, and it's got to start right now. You've got to remember, I'm the boss. You're not in a courtroom now. From now on, you do what you're asked, or you don't, or you just go. And I'll tell you what, I could have smacked him a dozen times in the face. And he just stood there dazed. No one had spoken to a QC like that. Anyway. And then there was flying. Anyway, so it's very strange, you know. My mother lived in Upper Hutt, just north of the Hutt Valley, and she used to come across once a year to see the grandkids and spend some time over in, so she knew where Canterbury was. It's 12,000 miles from Manston to Upper Hutt, 17,000 kilometres. About 10 years later, the phone goes at home in Kent. Hello. G'day. Do you know a guy called John Burrett, a QC from Canterbury, who used to be an aviator? Yes, 10 years later. Well, he's just been arrested for being naughty. And you probably remember this, you might remember this story. It was actually about 2003. And what had happened is that Burritt and his wife Jennifer had emigrated to New Zealand, coincidentally, had emigrated to Upper Hutt and were doing property development. And they just got it, and he and, not her, he and two others were going to hold up a Wellington businessman, Bill Trotter, at shotgun point, at gunpoint in Wellington for $1 million ransom. And they dug out this, they made a dugout in the hills just up behind Upper Hutt. Do you not remember this? And they were, until the ransom was paid. And thankfully, a council worker who just happened to be spraying weeds in this reserve happened to notice what you see in the top left-hand corner, a disturbance. And he was wise enough to tip off the police. The police staked the place out. They put a tracker device on his car, on her car, and one famous day they followed in unmarked cars into Wellington. I forget the name of it. It's at Botanical Gardens where the cable car goes up, and then there's the gardens up there, that sort of thing. And just as Burritt was getting out of his car to go and kidnap poor Trotter, he was sprung, and he was holding a shotgun, a gun. They sprung Burritt. And of course, coincidence, isn't it? So he got 6 or 7 years sentence, served about 5, and then, whereas before the Australians used to inherit the Brits who were criminals, this guy was sent back to England. That's Burritt in the top right-hand corner. He wrote a book called One Game Too Many. It was available in the Tauranga Library. You're wasting your time. You know, he just slates the New Zealand judicial system, and everyone in New Zealand is, you can fill in the blank yourself. Now, there's 2 more charters that I'm actually starting to enjoy myself. But I'll tell you why, because it's not just taking free for me to be. So I'm down crossing the channel as captain on 3 rotations to Calais, I think, that day, and I'm just approaching Dover on my first rotation, and no radio, no mobile phones in those days. And the base controller calls me up and says, "Message from your wife, phone Glasgow urgent." That was all the message was. No one else needs to know about things. And so I phoned Glasgow and they said, "We're really up the creek. We've got to have you up here tonight. And because we've got a flight out to Denmark tomorrow, we're unstuck unless you can help us." So I did a quick calculation. The weather was good, and assuming there was no mechanical problems on my next 2 departures to France and back, I still could not make Gatwick because I lived up in the top part of Kent. This was out of Dover. I had no time to get up home, get all my gear, and get to Gatwick in time. It's just impossible to do. So now I've got to find, I said to the Scots guys, "Yeah, that's fine," without thinking. And so now I've got to phone my wife at home and ask her to pack all my stuff. Well, I was sort of semi-packed anyway, but get my stuff. And it's like a triangle. She's up there, Dover's down here, Gatwick's over there. Now, at a prearranged time, she's got to drive to a motorway service area over here. I drove up for Dover there. Have you ever tried getting changed in the back seat of a car? It's actually quite difficult. And drive like hang to get to Gatwick with about 10 minutes to spare to get the last flight up to Glasgow. So up at 6, out at the airport at 7, 8 o'clock departure, go to Aberdeen, takes about 50 minutes. To fly oil rig workers. It's about 2 hours at Purple Line across the North Sea to Esbjerg. And I was presented by a very lovely young Scottish lass, Kay Morrison. And what I liked is that Kay had done that job a few times before, so she was okay with the paperwork and the money and everything else like that. Because that company had no credit card, she was carrying quite a significant amount of fuel to refuel in Danish krone, to refuel in Denmark, plus ancillary costs and things like that. So I just said, "Well, you look after the paperwork and the money, Kay." And I didn't say it, but I thought it. Don't lose the money, Kay. Tempting fate. Anyway, we arrive in Esberg. Now we've got about a 3 or 4 wait, haven't we? While these rig workers go to some adjacent area, then they're flown out by helicopter and the crew exchange takes place and they come back. So we've got about 3 or 4 hours, that side of things. So we refuel the plane, we tidy the plane. Now we're going for lunch. So we go for lunch at the airport cafe in the departure sort of area there. It's quite busy, lunchtime. Let me give you a public health warning. When you order food in Denmark, and there's 2 of you, only order 1 meal. Because we ordered these special burgers and chips or whatever it was. And the burgers, yeah, you know what I mean. We're just stupid oversized. This is for 1 person. And no kidding, the chips came out in a bucket, not a bucket, but in a bucket. And if we had just ordered 1 meal, the 2 of us could not have eaten all that food. It was just food waste, but that's the way it goes. And because we're not in a hurry, we just sat at the table and passed time. And I distinctly remember the waitress coming up and sort of saying, can I clear the table? Yeah, that's fine. We sort of leaned back in our chairs. And I remember she had a little trolley with black plastic bags, a bag on the front. So all the rubbish was just, she got the 2 buckets of chips, emptied these into, you know the way the story's going, Callum, and into the black bag, and then she just got with a cloth, just scooped up all the loose bits of pieces and just scooped it into the black bag, and off she went. We go down the crew room, there's TV going or something down there, we go for a bit of a walk, that sort of thing. Then before the rig workers are due back, I said, look, we've got to go out and recheck the aircraft, got to open it up, you know, it's been closed up and locked. Got to be careful in case some baggage handlers damage the wings, just we're going to do a quick check. Then we should have time for a coffee before the rig workers came, so we did all our bits. I go to the counter, get my coffee, go over and sit at a table, but Kay's taking too long. And I glance around and she's doing all this sort of thing, the purse and all the rest of it. She can't find the money. She comes and says, I can't find the money. Right, okay, we've got a crisis because now the clock's ticking with these rig workers due. Back to the crew room, nothing. Go back out to the aircraft, no money, nothing on the pavement, there's no wind, it wouldn't have blown away. So there's a program in the UK, maybe some in the UK and New Zealand, called Crime Watch, where they recreate crimes to stimulate the mind of anyone who might have witnessed a crime. So I said, we're going to do a Crime Watch job on here. And we must have looked like a couple of prats. We went and sat at this table without any food that we'd sat at before, and we pretended to eat chips, sort of thing. We reenact the scene. And suddenly I said, I know where that money is. It's our last chance. You left it on the table, maybe in an envelope, and it's in those black bags. It was our only hope. I'll tell you what, this is seriously comedy territory. So I'm a pilot. Long sleeve white shirt, I've got 4 stripes, there's Kay, long sleeve shirt, she's got 1 stripe and all the rest of it. I have to go to the cafe manager and, remember he doesn't speak good English, and explain that we'd like to go through all the rubbish bags, please. And he didn't understand why, and he just shrugged his shoulders and said yes. And there were about 6 or something rubbish bags behind the counter up at one end. So the public is still coming in, they're queuing up, they're ordering their food, they're paying for their food, and there's these 2 pilots scavenging through the rubbish bags. Poor pilots. I can see it now. So I said, okay, you look after those, I'll look after these, but you get going. And she was coming towards the end of her black bags, and I was about to start my last black bag, still with no success. And I glanced around, and poor girl, I could see tears starting in the corner of her eye, and her mouth was going like this. And I spoke to him, and I said, please, I know how to do engine failure after takeoff. I know how to do stall and spin recovery on IMC. I know how to do everything. But I don't, if she starts crying, I do not know what to do. Help me, please. I'm not trained for this sort of thing. And he answered my prayer. I was giving up hope, but I didn't tell her that. And right at the very last bag, I reached right down to the bottom amongst the gravy and cold coffee dregs, all the rest of it, through a mass of chips. That's the key. You thought I was joking before, didn't you? And I found an envelope. I pull open this envelope, rip it open, and then one of those Ziploc plastic bags, there is all the money. She saw this and she started crying. God, but what do you do? Do I? Quandary. Do I go and put my fatherly arm around her and comfort her and say, look, you know, just put it behind you, everything will be fine? Or do I assert my authority and say, stop it? It was an accident? Stop it, grow up. Or something like, what do you do? I don't know. While I'm pondering, well, this is measured in parts of a second, you've got to remember. I glance over her shoulder and there's the oil rig workers arriving with all their baggage. No time for any of that, thank you. And I go out to look after the loading and ask her to bring all the passengers out en masse. So I supervise the loading, and the reason to ask her to bring all the passengers out en masse, you don't want passengers dribbling out, there's a reason for it, is all these big husky oil rig workers, there's some big fellas there, and you want them sitting up the front because of the balance of the aircraft, so you want to be selective. Wait, come on, please, this way. But then they're all carrying duty-free bags, aren't they? They've stopped in the duty-free shop on the way out. Hang on a minute, I'm dealing with this from time to time across the English Channel. I've been down this road before, and I know what's going to happen. These guys will be on an oil rig for 28 days, for a month, working horrible weathers, 24/7, you can write the script yourself, and no social contact, remember there's no internet these days, and all the rest of it, and there'll be a few of them sloshed halfway across the North Sea. Remember there's this pretty young female co-pilot, that might be a factor as well. So the easiest thing is to stop it before it starts. So it's another way to win friends, to say, listen guys, it's company policy, which I just invented, that all your duty-free goes into the lockers, and a few people tell you the truth. Anyway, that's the way it goes. But you've got the keys to the starter, and we're leaving in 2 minutes. I actually don't care whether you're on board or not. Hop on board, duty-free in the lockers, and away we go. So we flew back to Aberdeen, left the rig workers there, dead leg back to Glasgow, and just wrapping, or she was wrapping up the paperwork. And I was just about to pick up the phone to call a cab because my hotel was slightly out of town. On a golf course, actually. And she saw me reaching for this. And let me tell you the best words you can ever have from a female co-pilot at the end of a day's work. What Kay said. She said, Linton, I think after today, if you want to delay your taxi for a little while, I think I owe you a beer. Good. All right. Okay, one more. We got the charter to Le Mans 24-hour race. This is probably my best ever charter I did, which lies to the southwest of Paris. It's you've probably seen it on TV, YouTube and things. Runs every June from 4 o'clock on the Saturday to 4 o'clock on the Sunday. So Friday afternoon, we've lost our aircraft by now because the year's gone and we couldn't afford to keep it on. But we'd actually got the charter, so we sub-chartered a 406 in from Norwich. And I met the pilot down at Blackbush Airport, which is marked there. Blackbush is a GA airport to the southwest of London, only a stone's throw from Farnborough, well, you probably know where that is. And so he flew it down. Now we're taking the directors of Gallagher International, which is a big tobacco company in those days, and they ran probably the most popular cigarette brand in the UK at the time called Silk Cut. And so these directors and their wives were going on a Swanee down to Orléans, down to Le Mans, to cover the race, of course, that sort of thing. So we did a briefing for the flight down and discussed things. And then the Norwich pilot says to me, oh, by the way, I'll fly south. You can fly the leg back to the UK. Well, that's fine. Happy with that. And he said, but I ought to warn you, the fault's been on the aircraft for a couple of days, but the gull wing handle, we believe, it's been there for a few days, seems to seat all right when you close it, but there's probably a fault with a micro switch under there, and what's happening is that the master warning light on the front panel is flashing from time to time, and of course you've got passengers behind you looking at it and see a master caution or warning light there. It could be disturbing, so there's not a lot you can do. But we agreed that whatever happened, you wouldn't try and reset that. You'd slam it if you were flying. You'd slam it, but do not try and reset it. So I agreed that. So we went down to Le Mans, I tell you what, I was in the right-hand seat navigating. You do not need the Le Mans NDB to navigate, to find the place. You just got to look out the window. And it's the antithesis, or exactly like, you know, the Mojave Desert like it is now with all COVID aircraft lined up there. As far as you could see, there's just a sea of corporate jets from all over the world. It's just a massive event. 20,000 British people go there alone. So we get in and we find a parking space. It was difficult. And the directors and their wives were going off to the hotel. But the operations manager said to me, oh, by the way, this is where we're staying. Remember, there's no mobile phones. This is where we're staying. Why don't you and the other party come and join us for breakfast tomorrow morning? Anytime, don't worry. That's fine. We got a rental car because we're at a hotel out of town. So the next morning we find where he's staying. They're actually all staying in a castle. And the party had been going all night, there's no doubt, and breakfast. Well, I did schoolboy French in Live-In when I was at Horowhenua College, and if I've got this right, breakfast was called le petit déjeuner. Well, they must, maybe I got this wrong, or they renamed it, but this breakfast seemed to be called Meurtre and Chandon, and you didn't need a knife and fork for it. And the dolly birds around, oh, it's incredible. We were given VIP passes. We were there at the start of the race in the VIP box. This is a photograph from the year that we were there, which I forget. And so where the starting box is in the middle of the photograph, we were in the hospitality boxes just above there. What an experience, you know, to see and be a part of, and unlimited hospitality. I mean, it's just dolly birds galore. And I think the basic rule is that they get the sack if your glass went below halfway full. You just constantly top up. But, you know, after a while. So we went back to the hotel and went back the next day mid-morning, and Silk Cut were doing very well. By about an hour or two before the race is due to finish, unless things went seriously wrong, Silk Cut were going to get a 1-2. Probably unheard of, but we're going to get a 1-2 on a win, and this would be tremendous for the Gallagher guys. But I could smell a rat, couldn't I? Now remember, it's our charter. The other guy's just flying there. And so I didn't have a copy of the contract. But we've got to think about penalties, because we're due out at 5 o'clock. There's no way we're going to leave at 5 o'clock with media interest and interviews and parties and you name it. That's I could see that coming. But we ought to set something in stone for damage charges and things like that. So I just got a blank bit of paper, and which he signed. No problem. Signed, and I had to find a basis to do this. And so what I said is that for every hour after 5 o'clock scheduled departure, there will be plus 25%. So after 2 hours will be plus 50%, 4 hours, the price of the contract will be double. He signed it, witnessed everything, that's fine, and they paid. Would you believe? Okay, so anyway, when we eventually get these people into the aircraft, and I'd already said, look, you've got two options. Blackbush Airport's closed, and my car's there inside the compound. At this time of the night, I can only take you to Heathrow or Gatwick. What do you want? And so they said, well, no, we're going to Heathrow. So I took them into Heathrow, left them at the GA terminal there, and handed the aircraft over to the Norwich pilot, because he's now got a dead leg up to Norwich because the aircraft's due out on charter the next morning. I'll tell you what, as I left the aircraft, I could smell an awful lot of urine. Well, since 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. Anyway, that's another point. Now I've got to get a taxi down to Blackbush. Now I've got to break through the security fencing to wake up the security guard who's reading a book, and his radio blaring, and he got a bit upset because I breached the perimeter, but I needed my car. But I remember in the car on the way home, you know, no motorway traffic at 2 o'clock in the morning, just sitting there thinking, I thought, well, I can't understand why anyone would honestly work for a living, you know, when you enjoyed yourself like that. So that was a pleasure part of it. Into the office the next morning, walk in the door to be told that I'm lucky to be alive. What do you mean? Why? Tell me. Well, you're working this out. I can see it now. The pilot got brushed off once he left Heathrow, and on the way about this warning light winking at him, decided, he broke his own rule, to just reset it just a little bit, and the whole window, the whole gull wing flew off, went back, badly damaged the tailplane. If he tried that with passengers on board, no thanks. And the aircraft was out of action for about 6 months. And you can just think of the chaos. He's doing over 200 knots. The noise, the explosion, the enormity of the event, the cold temperatures. You can write the script yourself, and a dynamic sort of thing. Well, there we go. Right, pressing on. We took a lease. I've got a hang-up about Pipe and Navajo chieftains. And we took a lease on actually this aircraft, Nikki, and it always seemed to have electrical problems that no one could fix. I'll give you an example. I had a charter with Pfizer Chemical guys out of Manston up to Stockholm, and decided to stop at Copenhagen, Roskilde, the GA airport there, for a leg stretch. You've got to remember the human bladder. It's not how much fuel you've got in the tanks. You've got to think about your people as well. Leg stretch anyway, and then did the same route on the way back. We were just coming up over Holland with Amsterdam away to the northwest, and I lose all navigation aids. So in airways, lost all navigation aids. Didn't matter what you did or tried or anything else like that. There were no. I had radio. So do I divert to Amsterdam or do I carry on? Thank goodness it was VMC. So I cleared airways and flew VMC to the UK. Now, where we were at Manston, there was a company in Shoreham, which is an airfield down on the south coast, were riding or trying to ride under our AOC, Air Operators Certificate, piggybacking, you can do that. And therefore, because I was chief pilot, I had to do some base training with their pilot. So their pilot positioned their Navajo up to Gatwick the afternoon or evening before. I went to Gatwick, we had a meal, staying in the same hotel meal, and then we used some time afterwards in the evening to go through some of the sort of paperwork to deal with base training, understanding ops manuals and things like that. And I remember just at random, I pulled the AirRad out and I said, well, we're out of Gatwick tomorrow morning. Tell me, read it up and then brief me. What will happen if we have total electrical failure tomorrow morning? And he read it and we briefed on it, what we would do, and it was just a random flick of the manual. You know the way the story's going, don't you? Is the next morning we've got the chairman of Eurotunnel sitting behind us, and we're going to fly him across to Latuke out of Gatwick, and 3 or 4 minutes after takeoff we're in cloud climbing, and we lost all the electrics. Radio, nav aids, all electrics. Didn't matter what you tried, well, we just lost all electrics. Luckily, we boned up on it the night before, by luck. And basically, what the rules are, go away anywhere you like, but don't try coming back. Headed on back down to Lyd, actually. The weather was good down there, and now we've got to put the chairman into a taxi, ship him to Dover, put him on a ferry, get another taxi the other end. Yeah. Then that didn't last long, the lease, for various reasons. Photo Flight were based at based at Ashford, but flying out of Lyd. A Seneca 1, if you think about a Seneca 1, that was 30 years old and had been doing low-level aerial photography in the Channel for over 30 years. They wanted a weekend pilot. They employed a guy, it was actually ex-mariner, second mate's ticket, on Monday, Friday. They wanted a weekend pilot. Well, that was fine. So I went down there, did a couple of hours training, and this is a sort of a typical day. You're about 140 knots. You've got to keep the speed up because remember the stall speed's affected by angular bank and G and those sort of things. So you're basically playing silly beggars around at 200 feet above sea level. Tight turns because ships in the English Channel, a little bit like London buses, you know, there's nothing for an hour and you get 3 as a bunch going to the same destination. So you're weaving amongst all these ships. The guy in the back, the photographer, has taken the door off, the photographer, and a very good guy. And he's got a computer on his laptop, and you can buy from Lloyd's London, it's about £40,000, you can buy a database of all the world shipping. And so as we approached the ship, I would call out the name, he'd stab it in, so by the time he actually got up to the ship, he already had on screen the registration, details of the ship, etc. like that. So we would photograph every ship in the channel, about a 4-hour sortie. I'll tell you what, but then you also do commissions. Commissions where a ship owner wants a specific photograph of his ship. And board chairmen are egotistical people. They must be. It's probably why they're chairman. All this to it. And every board chairman wants a photograph of this brand new ship that they've just signed the multi-dollar, million-dollar check on, with the white cliffs of Dover in the background. Well, I used to go to the photographic laboratory sometimes for odd reasons, and there the girls would put together these great big sort of 3 metre by 2 metre murals with that ship that I just photographed. White Cliffs? Well, I thought it was down off Jersey on Saturday morning. Yeah, they just mix it, don't they? And it's all like that. But they're called commissions, and they were actually quite good earners. But what happened, I did that for 2 years, and then one day, and this is a sort of photograph that you would be sometimes required to do. Did someone say there's a 500-foot rule? I hope not. What would happen, the regular pilot phoned me up one day, 2 years later, and he said, look, I just ought to warn you. He said, I was at a headcorn, which is a maintenance airfield a short distance away, doing a check flight after some maintenance, and the control column came off in my hands while I was doing this check flight. And I think, you know, because there's no doubt that I had about a 3.5-hour journey home from where I had to get home at the end of it. And because you're pulling 2 Gs at 60-degree angular bank quite a lot, and it's really flying, I could feel it in my arms and shoulders. Well, you imagine the stresses on the control column, and there was a weld failure down underneath, and this control column came away in his hands. He had enough nous to lean across and level the aircraft and drag himself across and land the aircraft. But then I had to think more about it. You know, if that had happened 60-degree angular bank, 200 feet above sea level, and you just go straight in. So I was becoming a bit unenthusiastic anyway. So decided to call it quits. Sorry, it was that curry I had at lunchtime. Well, not quite finished. That was 2 or 3 more minutes. So every pilot's got the story about people that you knew and who were killed in aviation. And forgetting the 2 names on the top there, the one that got close to my heart was David Ennis at Tauranga Airport back in 1979. When I did my CPL ground course at Ardmore, David Ennis was my desk buddy. He paired the desk next to me. Lovely character guy, and he was so good. He was round our place from time to time. He's just such a nice guy. He was an usher at our wedding. He was that friendly and such a lovely guy, and it really rocked me to learn when I was in the UK many years later that he was an Air New Zealand pilot, but in his off days he would support the club down at Tauranga, and you might remember this incident. He wasn't actually instructing that day. He was on a tractor with a gang mower behind, so probably had earmuffs on. A fellow student decided to bomb him, flew in behind him to give him a bit of a fright, bit of turbulence, and killed him on the spot. And all I'm saying is I am glad I was not on the airfield that day, because I do not know what I would have done to that pilot. Anyway, I went back to instructing, but I was losing my edge. And, you know, 30-year holiday's long enough. You know, the thoughts that go through your mind, you know, if you left England and came back to lovely home country of New Zealand, well, I would miss this.
Yeah, right.
So the 30-year holiday was over, and I actually stayed on for another 2 years to work for an American company, but then retired back here. So just simply, in summary, of reflections, flying is the easy part of flying. I was glad at Manston that we had a flying club. and not a flying school. There was a pub locally. Yes, the camaraderie brought that club together. It was seriously brilliant. Senior single pilot operations around Europe can be a lonely existence. It's not for everyone. You're overnighting in many foreign countries, and you need self-motivation for those sort of things. But what I liked was the engagement with other passengers, ATC I praise, all but one. The British and Dutch equally as good, brilliant. I won't give you any prizes for who the bottom. Sorry, parlez-vous français? They still break the rules about speaking French when the rules say that they should speak English. I never felt under-prioritised as a smaller aircraft. I was at one point number 5 on the taxiway behind the heavies at Gatwick. You were at Brussels that day. You were treated the same, irrespective of size. Finally, sort of just looking at today's present situation, we all know that aviation profitability, maintenance and safety are all in the same basket. And I hope today's aviation COVID situation doesn't change that. And what I mean is maintenance suffering. So I started with the words Cape Reinga. I have a plea, please, to young Kiwis. The world does not end at Cape Reinga. Once this COVID business is out of the way, the world starts at Cape Reinga. Flying is a part of aviation. Aviation is an experience. I'm glad I had that experience. A bit longer.
Congratulations on an amazing and very interesting career, Linton, and thank you for sharing it with us.